I was 10 years old when my mother shoved me into a dark closet in Budapest and told me not to make a sound. That was the last time I saw her. For 80 years, I believed that kind of evil died in 1944, but a few months ago, Jesus Christ told me I was wrong. He showed me a new Holocaust returning to Europe, but this time they won't use yellow stars. They will use your bank account, your digital passport, and a virtual wall no one can climb. Jesus looked at me with eyes like burning lions and said, "Albert, the spirit of Pharaoh never died. He just changed his clothes. If you think the world is safe, listen." You might wonder how a 92-year-old watchmaker from Boston knows the secrets of the future. To understand these warnings, you must know how I ended up before the King of Kings. My name is Albert Weinberg. I spent decades repairing the gears of timepieces, but my own internal clock stopped during a routine cardiology checkup. My heart flatlined for exactly 8 minutes. To the doctors, I was just a corpse in a plastic chair. But while they were preparing to call my time of death, I was stepping into a reality more vivid than the sun. I didn't just see a light. I saw 7 shadows falling over Israel that made my blood run cold. What I'm revealing isn't a theory. These are the gears of God's clock clicking into place. From China's silent invasion to the moment the Iron Dome goes dark, I saw it all with the clarity of a man who survived one apocalypse already. I was kept alive through the ghettos of Hungary just to bring this specific warning to you. If your bank account was frozen tomorrow because of your faith, would you still stand? Please comment, "I will stand," if you are ready for the truth, and subscribe to stay alerted. You need to hear what Jesus showed me next about Haifa, because it wasn't an army that invaded, it was a business deal. I spent 45 years in a small shop in downtown Boston, hunched over the delicate gears of Patek Philippe's and old Rolexes. To most people, I was just a quiet man with a thick accent and a number tattooed on his arm, but I lived with one eye on the ticking clock and the other on the borders of Israel. Having survived the Budapest ghetto, I knew that peace is often just a thin layer of glass waiting to be shattered. I spent my evenings reading the news from Jerusalem and comparing it to the ancient prophecies I had memorized as a boy. My hands were steady until that Tuesday morning during my routine cardiology checkup. The waiting room at Beth Israel Deaconess smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I was sitting in a hard plastic chair, checking my own pocket watch, when the rhythm of the world suddenly changed. A massive, cold weight slammed into my chest as if an invisible stone wall had collapsed right on top of my ribs. I tried to call for the nurse, but my lungs felt like they were filled with heavy liquid lead. I saw a woman in blue scrubs drop her clipboard and rush toward me, her mouth moving in a silent scream that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep, dark well. Then came the click, the sound of a mainspring finally snapping after a century of tension. My vision didn't go black. It became impossibly sharp as I felt myself lift upward toward the fluorescent ceiling tiles. I looked down and saw a 92-year-old man slumped over, his head tilted back and his skin turning the pale gray color of wood ash. It was strange to see myself from that angle, so small and fragile. Later, the doctors told my children that my heart had stopped beating for exactly 8 minutes. In those 8 minutes, while they were charging the paddles, I was already leaving the hospital behind. The frantic noise of the crash cart and the beep of the monitors began to dissolve into a heavy, golden silence. I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange sense of relief, like a soldier finally taking off a heavy rucksack after a long march through the mud. A powerful force began to pull me away from the room, dragging me through the walls as if they were made of smoke. The sterile light of the clinic was replaced by a brilliance that didn't hurt my eyes, but seemed to glow from within everything I saw. I knew I wasn't alone in that mist, and I felt that the real history was about to begin. The hospital walls didn't just fade, they dissolved like tissue paper in water. I felt a violent upward tug, but instead of the cold wind I expected, I was suddenly enveloped in a golden mist that had a physical weight and temperature like a warm bath. For the first time in 92 years, the constant ache in my joints and the heavy pressure in my chest simply vanished. It was as if I had been wearing iron armor my entire life and someone finally unlatched the straps. I wasn't in a tunnel, I was in a place where light came from inside the air itself, smelling like rain on hot pavement. I knew I had crossed a border no watch could measure. I felt a hand on my shoulder with a grip like iron, but a touch as soft as silk. When I turned, I didn't see the pale figure from the paintings in the Boston galleries. Standing before me was a man with skin the color of polished bronze and eyes that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. His hair was thick and dark, like sheep's wool, and his presence was so heavy that my knees buckled before I could even think to bow. I didn't cry because I was sad. I wept because his reality made my 92 years of struggle feel like a blurry shadow. I realized instantly that the survivor had finally met his rescuer. "Albert," he said, and the sound of my name didn't hit my ears. It vibrated through my marrow as if he had known me since before the Budapest ghetto was built. He reached down, pulled me to my feet, and looked at me with a gaze that saw every gear and spring inside my soul. He told me that I had survived the fires of men so that I could witness the fire of God's truth. He said he had 7 specific things to show me, 7 shadows falling over the land of my fathers that the world refuses to see. I knew that what he was about to reveal would change everything I thought I knew about our future. Jesus held my hand, and the golden mist shifted instantly. Suddenly, we were standing on a cobblestone street in Budapest that I recognized from my childhood, but the people were wearing modern coats and staring into glowing smartphones. I saw a young Jewish family trying to buy bread, but when they tapped their phones, a jagged red light flashed, "Access denied." Their neighbors weren't shouting slurs, they were just pointing at their screens and whispering to the authorities. Jesus looked at me and said, "Albert, the world thinks it is more civilized, but the heart of man remains the same. They will exclude my people from the world's table with a single keystroke, creating a ghetto without walls." My breath hitched as I realized what I was seeing. It was 1944 all over again, but the yellow stars had been replaced by digital codes and frozen bank accounts. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling as I asked if there was any escape from this silent trap. He tightened his grip on my shoulder and reminded me of how Pharaoh once said, "Let us deal shrewdly with them lest they multiply." He told me that the enemy doesn't need cattle cars when he can simply delete a person's right to exist in the digital economy. This wasn't just politics. It was an ancient spirit of exclusion returning to the very soil where I lost my mother. The scene dissolved again, and the cold air of Budapest was replaced by the scorched heat of a city in chaos. I saw the towers of Tehran shrouded in black smoke, and the symbols of the Islamic Republic were being torn down by angry crowds. I felt a brief hope, but Jesus pointed toward the outskirts. Thousands of men without uniforms were looting government bunkers, carrying heavy lead canisters and advanced missile components. They moved like a swarm of hornets toward the borders. "The head of the snake will be cut off," Jesus warned me, "but the venom will scatter into many smaller mouths that no one can track or bargain with." I watched as those swarms joined a larger movement coming from the north. A flag with a white crescent was lowered from a western building and raised over a new dark alliance. I saw leaders from Libya and Sudan bowing before man in Ankara, pledging their drones and their oil to a single cause, the march on Jerusalem. Jesus whispered that I was seeing the fulfillment of Ezekiel's vision, where Persia, Cush, and Put unite under a northern commander. "The bridge between east and west will become the gate of the enemy," he declared. I realized that the alliances I had trusted for 80 years were nothing more than sand blown away by a coming storm. My heart, which had stopped in that Boston hospital, felt like it was breaking for my people. These weren't just random wars, they were the gears of a massive ancient clock finally clicking into place. Jesus looked at me with those eyes of fire, showing me that the world was being prepared for a trial it wasn't ready to face. He told me that the only safety was in the truth he was revealing, not in the weapons of men. As heavy as these visions were, I could see that the shadow was only starting to spread. "Albert," he said, "this was just the beginning. What I must show you next is what truly made me tremble." The scene shifted from the burning borders to something that broke my heart even more than the fire of war. Jesus led me into deep concrete corridors beneath the streets of Haifa and Beersheba. I saw children playing tag in hallways that smelled of damp cement and recycled air. They weren't just visiting, they lived there. These children had never seen a clear blue sky without the white, jagged streaks of interceptor missiles, or heard the morning birds without the rhythmic wail of a siren. I watched a little girl drawing a sun on a gray wall with a piece of yellow chalk. She looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face. I turned to Jesus, my hands shaking as I asked why these innocent ones were being raised in the dark like mushrooms. He looked at the children with a tenderness that could melt stone and said, "Albert, these are the children of the underground. They are being born in the shadows so they can be the first to recognize the great light when I descend. Do not pity them. They are the generation that will possess the gates of their enemies." He told me that just as I was preserved in a closet in Budapest, these children are being preserved for a moment that the world's greatest armies will fear, but they will welcome with songs of joy. The concrete walls dissolved into the bright, busy port of Haifa, but something was wrong. As a watchmaker, I noticed small details, and I saw that the signs on the giant cranes and the cargo containers weren't in Hebrew or English. They were in bold Chinese characters. Jesus pointed to the massive ships unloading technology that looked like a spiderweb of invisible wires. He said, "The kings of the East do not need to fire a single bullet to conquer. They only need to own the road and the heartbeat of the trade." He showed me the Euphrates drying up, not just as a river of water, but as a river of influence being diverted. Then the sky over Israel turned into a literal furnace. I saw thousands of missiles, a swarm so thick it blotted out the stars, converging from Lebanon, Yemen, and Iraq all at once. I watched the Iron Dome batteries fire until they glowed red, but then, one by one, the monitors flickered and went dark. The system was overwhelmed, saturated by the sheer volume of hate. I fell to my knees and wept, hearing a cry from Jerusalem that reached the very heavens because there was no nation left on earth to answer. Suddenly, the atmosphere split open like a torn curtain, and I saw massive hailstones and fire falling from the heavens. I tried to speak, but the sheer power of that divine intervention robbed me of my breath. Jesus stood over me, his presence expanding until he seemed to fill the entire horizon. He watched the fire consume the weapons of men and whispered, "When they are finally alone, Albert, when every wall they built has crumbled and every human alliance has betrayed them, they will realize that I am their only shield. I have allowed the iron to fail so they can find the Rock of Ages." He showed me that the moment of Israel's greatest weakness would become the moment of the king's greatest strength, stripping away every false hope. The smoke from the mountains began to clear, revealing a remnant of people gathered together in a silence that felt holy. I saw a man approach another, pointing at his hands and asking, "What are these wounds?" The answer came back like a thunderclap, "Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends." I watched an entire nation fall on its face, the veil finally torn away from their eyes as they recognized the king they had pierced centuries ago. Jesus looked at me one last time, his eyes burning with an urgency that made my own heart beat again. "Go back, Albert," he commanded. "The time is short." Jesus looked at me one last time, his presence filling the horizon of that golden realm with a weight that felt like pure love. "Albert," he said, his voice a gentle thunder that resonated in my very marrow, "you have survived the fires of men so you could testify to the fire of my truth. Go back and tell them what you have seen, for the apple of my eye is about to face its greatest trial." I felt a sudden heavy resistance in my soul, a desperate urge to stay in that perfect peace, rather than return to a body that was 92 years of aches and scars. But he simply smiled and said, "The time is shorter than the watch on your wrist." Before I could argue, a violent, suffocating pull dragged me downward as if I were being crammed back into a suit 10 sizes too small. I slammed back into my chest with a shock that felt like ice water hitting a furnace, and the warmth of heaven was instantly replaced by the biting cold of the hospital room and the rhythmic, piercing scream of the heart monitor. The nurse gasped and dropped her clipboard, shouting, "My God, he's breathing." I am telling you this because I didn't survive the Budapest ghetto and a flatline in a Boston hospital just to keep these secrets to myself. The 7 shadows I saw are not distant possibilities or mere political theories. They are the gears of God's massive clock finally clicking into place for this final generation. From the digital ghetto that will freeze your existence with a single keystroke to the terrifying moment the Iron Dome sputters and dies under a swarm of hate, every vision was a specific warning for this exact hour. I spent 80 years thinking the world had learned its lesson from the horrors of my youth, but Jesus showed me that the spirit of Pharaoh has only changed his clothes to look modern and digital. If I hesitated to speak before, it was because the weight of this truth is almost too much for one old man to carry. But the urgency in the king's eyes told me that silence is no longer an option for anyone who truly loves the truth of Israel and the world. If you are watching this and feeling a cold knot of fear in your stomach, or if the chaos in the news makes you want to hide, listen to what the watchmaker found on the other side of life. Do not look at the borders of Israel or the collapsing economies with despair. Look at them with a Bible in your hand and the Spirit in your heart. To those of you who feel the world is closing in, Jesus wants you to know that when the walls of men crumble, his light becomes the only true and unshakable foundation. The orientation he gave me is simple. Stop trusting the systems that can be deleted in a millisecond and start building your life on the rock that no digital wall can ever exclude. The underground generation is already being prepared in the darkness to recognize the great light when he descends. And he wants you to be standing ready right alongside them, completely unshaken by the shadows, because you already know how the story ends. I was that little boy hiding in the Budapest closet once, waiting for a savior who never came to rescue my mother from the dark. But I promise you, the Savior I met in that golden mist is coming back for all of us, and he will not be late by a single second. Please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next prophetic alert. And give this video a like to help spread this urgent warning to those who are still sleeping. I want to hear your voice in the community. Comment, "I will stand," if you are ready to face these 7 shadows with faith instead of fear. And share this with someone who needs to hear that there is hope beyond the fire. The gears are moving faster than ever, and the time on your wrist is exactly what he said it was, much shorter than you think.